A very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and very much welcome to the very last session of the Road Safety Capacity Building Program Webinar Series 1. But before we get started, Mark, if you can bring up the translation slide. Just a quick reminder to our Russian colleagues that are joining us on this webinar, there is Russian interpretation available. So you can select that at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And if you select Russian, you will be able to hear the translation into Russians. Thank you very much. If we move to the next slide, please, Mark. So once again, a very warm welcome. And we have now reached the very last session of our Road Safety Capacity Building Program, which has been brought to you by the Asia Pacific Road Safety Observatory, the APRSO, and the Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation, the CAREC program, and the Asian Development Bank. So the grant funding for this webinar series has been received from the Japan Fund for Poverty Reduction, which has been financed by the government of Japan through the Asian Development Bank. For those of you that are joining this webinar series for the very first time, my name is Jessica Trung, and I'm here from Lösninger, which is an organization that specializes in Vision Zero planning. So if we move to the next slide, as I mentioned earlier, this was a 5-part webinar series aiming to help build capacity throughout the Asia Pacific region. So we've now reached the very final session, which will touch on financing and stakeholder engagement. And as you can see from this slide there, we've got a great lineup of speakers representing the FIA Foundation, Asian Development Bank, the Global Road Safety Partnership, the George Institute, and Blaise Murphy Limited. So we've got a great lineup of speakers that will help us explore the different approaches to communicating a lot of the topics that we spoke about in the earlier parts of the webinar series, and how do we actually finance some of the strategies that we also discussed earlier in the webinar series. So as usual, we'll hear from each of our speakers in turn, and there will be an opportunity to ask questions during the question and answer session. But there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, so please feel free to use that to interact with others that are also on the webinar, or if you want to pose any questions to the speakers, and we will try to answer them as we go or during the Q&A session at the end. So if we move to the next slide, please, Mark. So while this is the last session of our first webinar series, at the last webinar, we also mentioned keep an eye out for series 2 of the webinars. And I'm proud to say that series 2 of this webinar series will be starting next week to coincide with the UN Road Safety Week. So the topic of the next webinar series will be on safe and sustainable transport. So it will be starting next week and ending in July. It's once again an online training, and we would love to see you all join us for this second edition of the webinar series. So details will be forthcoming, but the next one will start next week, and we hope you can join us. So if we move on to the next slide. So before we just start the session properly, just a couple of housekeeping rules as usual. Your microphone will be muted unless you are invited to speak. We encourage you to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen to ask questions throughout the webinar, and also at the end if you want to pose any questions to any of the experts. Other than that, we hope you enjoy the series, but before we started, as we're focusing on financing in this session, I want to sort of start off with a bit of a poll question so we can sort of understand where the representatives on this call are sort of at with financing and data once again. So Mark, if you can bring up the very first poll question. So we sort of want to understand how available is data in your country to help you evaluate the economic impact of road crashes. So the answers will range from very available to not available at all. So if you can kindly answer that poll question, we'll come back with the results after the presentations. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to introduce one of our panelists, Blaise Murphy. I think he is no stranger to many of you that is on this Zoom. Blaze is from Blaze Murphy Limited, and he will be coordinating and running the next part of this webinar. Over to you, Blaze.
Thanks, Jess, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everybody. Wonderful to be here with you, and thanks so much for all the active engagement right through this webinar series. It's been fantastic to see the level of interest and also the level of engagement right throughout. And I know there's been some great speakers, and furthermore, we'll have many more today. So as Jess mentioned, this session is really focusing on now, how do we unlock data to, yes, look at financing, but I would actually say more broadly around stakeholder engagement to actually drive forward progress. So we've looked into a lot of different aspects in this series about what type of data is available, the World Health Organization data, how data can inform planning and strategies. And now this is the outward face. This is now looking and seeing, well, what are the ways that we can use that to actually get better implementation, better funding, better decision making, and different types of approaches and data that can be used to do that. So this is the core part of today's session, and I really look forward in a moment to introducing the rest of our speakers to talk across that topic in a few different ways. But before that, I'm going to take just a few minutes to, I guess, give a little bit of an umbrella to thinking about some of the ways in which stakeholder engagement approaches can support these efforts. So I want to talk just a little bit broadly first in terms of how you as a person or an agency or an organization can step back from your day-to-day and think to yourself, yes, we've now got different data that can be used or different evidence, but how are we actually planning to get really effective stakeholder engagement to achieve better financing or better decisions or better implementation of road safety activities. So let me now just share my screen so I can get that presentation started. Okay, Jess, and just confirming you can see that okay?
All good, Blaze.
Great, thanks, Jess. Okay, so as I mentioned, this short presentation will have a focus on stakeholder engagement approaches to support enhanced financing. But as I mentioned to you, this could also be the case for stronger implementation of your strategies and action plans when it relates to addressing road safety. So firstly, a little bit about me. So I have a long background in government, stakeholder and community engagement. And I've also done that for a long time in road safety and sustainable transport. In fact, have kind of worked in and amongst government and stakeholder and community engagement now in more than 40 countries around the world, and have had the great pleasure to do so in the Asia Pacific for many years as well. So hopefully today, my short presentation will just bring some of the core fundamentals that I have used to work with many governments, non-governmental organizations, and agencies when trying to think about how to effectively engage whatever type of stakeholder to achieve impact in the work that we're doing. And you can see that I've worked with a number of different organizations to support that, both within those organizations, but also to government and non-governmental partners in those different countries. So I wanted to start off by essentially recapping a little bit from right earlier in this webinar series, which was that we got a very clear picture of what the World Health Organization was telling us. And it's telling us that whilst there is good news that the rates of road trauma are not rising much anymore, in fact have plateaued over a period of time. And whilst this is, of course, in some ways good news, the reality is it does mean that in general, we are still failing in our purpose. So our purpose is to see no fatalities on the roads, no serious injuries that have such a devastating impact on people's lives, families, economic situation, etc., let alone the 50% targets that have been laid out by the United Nations, the Sustainable Development Goals, and many other plans and commitments regionally and sub-regionally. In fact, myself personally, I feel that even a 50% reduction is just only a step, because that still suggests that we accept that half of the deaths on the roads should occur when of course we really should not accept any. But I guess this is the situation we're in, a plateau, but still much more to do. And we need to have a change in terms of what is happening to be able to really see that reduction start to occur. Simply doing the same is not going to be enough. But the good news, and you've heard a lot about them if you have been attending this webinar series over this last few weeks, is that we now have so many different resources, data, and evidence to help guide us. So we know we've got the problem, but the good news is we've got such a wide range of different resources and data that can now help to guide our decision making. You've heard about a lot of them in this webinar series, and you've heard how they can directly inform strategy planning, action planning, and many other ways and approaches to try and start to really see reductions in trauma that we know need to happen. So this is good news. The other good news when it comes specifically to financing is that we have existing funding mechanisms that are out there, that are being used, that have proven to be successful. And we have many extensive and generous funding commitments from a range of different funding agencies, governments, development partners, etc. So again, we can see here that the potential is there. We know we have a lot of the data and resources and evidence that are out there, produced internationally, regionally, and nationally. But we also know that there are funding models that are out there that can help to really drive and push the work that we need to do to see road safety be seriously prioritized and start to achieve those reductions in deaths and serious injuries. I also point out there on the screen the Motor Vehicles Insurance Fund from Papua New Guinea, which is a very innovative approach that is also one that has happened in my home country, Australia, where you see third-party liability insurance used to help fund road safety activities. So just one of the many examples, and you can see there as well the different resources and commitments that have also been outlined by some of the multilateral development banks as well. So in essence, the funding mechanisms and commitments are there, and we have so much data and evidence and resources that can help guide us. But despite all this, particularly when it comes to financing and funding road safety, we still have an exponential gap. You can see here that in the latest World Health Organization Global Status Report on Road Safety, 117 countries reported that they did indeed have a national road safety strategy, which is fantastic, but just 16 of those strategies are fully funded. Let that sink in for a moment, 16. So you can see here that despite the fact that we have funding commitments and mechanisms, despite that we have strong evidence and data, there is still a huge gap in trying to actually push that financing flow into the strategies that are developed to actually implement the different interventions we know are needed to save lives. So we know the problem, we know we have some of the solutions, and yet a gap still remains. Now, later in this webinar today, you'll hear about some different approaches, about good stakeholder engagement and different evidence and reports that you might be able to use to start fill the gap, both in terms of funding and better implementation. But as I said, I wanted to start off just with a little overview in terms of some stakeholder engagement approaches that you might be able to consider in terms of starting to try and essentially solve this problem of the gap between the data and evidence you might have and achieving the outcome you want to achieve. So in essence, what this slide is outlining to you is to make the case for you in your daily work, whether you're in an agency, an individual, an organization, to take a proper and considered approach to stakeholder engagement. Because the reality is every interaction that you have is an opportunity to start a conversation, to move forward, to start to see better commitments, partnerships, and collaboration relating to financing or implementation in road safety. However, what we also acknowledge is that often these conversations are only happening within our existing stakeholder pool or partner pool. So a question to ask is, how often are you or your organization stepping out of that community to talk to others and talk to them in terms of what they would see as important about the issue that you're passionate about, which is road safety. How ready are you, your team, your staff to capitalize upon any opportunities there to integrate road safety into the priorities that are made apparent by other stakeholders, financing stakeholders, partners, etc. And specifically about financing, how often are you positioning your issue in front of colleagues from ministries of finance or relevant funders? So taking a step back and doing some good stakeholder engagement planning and mapping can do is to help that you know which stakeholders you should spend your valuable time talking to. Ensure, as we've seen through this webinar series, you have the right data, facts, and stories, and you matching that to the right stakeholder. Ensure you know the best ways to communicate with them. And really importantly, ensure as much as possible that you and your team are on the same page when talking to stakeholders. So there are many different forms that you can use for stakeholder mapping. I've presented one here, and I think you'll get the slides after this session as well. But essentially the point is taking time as an organization or an agency to spend some initial planning time on mapping out who key stakeholders are, and then maintaining that stakeholder mapping is such an essential way in terms of being able to really proactively go out and talk to potential funders within government, outside government, or potential partners to help implementation. So you can see a number of different fields there in terms of outlining organizations, key contacts, their influence or impact, their areas of interest, and I'll come back to that more in a moment, what actions you would like them to take or any barriers that are there, what tactics you might use to help to engage them and convince them to support your issue, what data could help to influence them, and that will be different for different stakeholders, and of course, risk and mitigation. And when it comes to financing, I would strongly suggest that you actually even do this process or this activity as it relates to any potential funding or financing partners. Try to list them all out and put as much information into this type of mapping so that you can get a really good sense of what is your most impactful way of engaging those stakeholders and talking to them, not just in the words that make sense to you, but in the words that make sense to them and are going to have their interest and attention and bring that back to road safety. So I term this as talking to them, not you. You're already convinced. So any facts or evidence or data that you think as important could well be important to another stakeholder from Ministry of Finance or a funding agency or an implementation partner, but you can't presume that just because it makes sense to you, it will make sense to them. So if you do conduct a good stakeholder mapping, really take care of these areas of interest and key concerns and try to put yourself in their mind. What reason should they have to care about your issue, not the other way around? We spend a lot of time trying to convince funders and implementing partners why they should care about our issue, but we do not always spend a whole lot of time about why our issue is important to issues that are important to them. So I would really strongly suggest and encourage you to even make a very simple list where on one side you list down key points of your issue, whatever road safety issue might be, and for each of those make cross bullet points about why it would be important to this particular funder or this particular partner, trying to take into mind what their priorities are. Let me give an example. If you're talking to a Ministry of Finance, you could continue to try and convince them over and over again that road safety is an important issue and it's good for the economy. And this is true. But if you're finding it's not working, perhaps there are other ways to consider it. So what priorities can you find out are important at that particular time for a Ministry of Finance? Are they looking at job creation? Are they looking at tourism? Are they looking at climate issues? Whatever it might be, find ways then to match your issue to their issues. And that can be then the basis and the structure for how you talk to them about prioritizing funding and implementation for road safety. And then, of course, importantly, you can go and look and see what existing data or facts or stories you have that can support that and what you're missing. And the missing is the piece that you can start to add into as an organization or an agency to be able to be ready when you have that opportunity to speak to those stakeholders, to have data and facts and stories and personal anecdotes that will speak to their interest. Of course, you need your core data as well, but this is an important point to make. And then once you've thought about this, really think closely about where and how you will communicate with them. So a really important point is to map any upcoming opportunities that may be an opportunity to interact or engage with those different stakeholders. You may look to strategically invite those stakeholders to your opportunities or create opportunities specifically for them, meetings or workshops that you think could interest them and gives you a chance to bring forward your data and evidence to really help to continue to build that narrative and convince. You might look to establish formal collaboration opportunities, and you might also find ways to integrate further road safety issues into their areas of interest or events or workshops. As I mentioned at the start, every chance of an engagement is an opportunity to plant that seed further. It's just about taking time to think through what is going to make most sense to them and have the best chance of really capturing their attention. Finally, I would mention, make sure also to do some good tracking of keeping your team aligned. So it's quite good practice to keep up a stakeholder communication tracker where you list out those that you are engaging with. You can list out what type of activities you are conducting with them, when it's going to happen, but most importantly, who's responsible. Because that means that then within your team, you're able to go back to a specific focal to check with them to see what's the latest in terms of communication with this stakeholder. What are the main messages that we're passing on to them? What's the best data that I can use to talk to them so that you're not having to recreate this from the start every single time. And then with this bit of extra planning, and I acknowledge it will take a bit of extra time, but it will position you much better and in a much stronger place to be able to implement that effective stakeholder engagement. And it will actually free you up to keep innovating and thinking about how to generate and identify more data and evidence and facts that matches that interest of that funder, that matches that interest of that government agency, that matches that interest of the implementation partner. You can look then to diversify who is talking to them and continue to update those plans so that you can ensure that you are still creating a streamline of data and evidence and facts that are getting pushed through to those stakeholders so that they continue to see where the opportunities are that relates to them resourcing or partnering with you to achieve the outcomes you want to achieve. So in summary, in this brief overview, as I mentioned at the start, we still see that there is this strong amount of evidence and data available to us. We've seen that there are strong funding, commitments, mechanisms that are there, but we have this gap. And hopefully, at least part of the solution for you is to take some time for really thinking through a kind of a coordinated and considered stakeholder engagement approach so that you can be positioned well to capitalize on those engagements with different partners, to outline different data and evidence that is available, to help to increase that funding and resourcing, and to increase better partnership for implementation of strategies and action plans that you may have to address road safety. So with that, I'm going to now pause myself and now pass over to the first of our speakers who will be talking to you about some different ideas and approaches and also data and evidence to help you in that job of convincing different stakeholders. And the first of those speakers will be Avi Silverman, who is the Deputy Director for the FIA Foundation. And Avi, I'll invite you now onto the screen. I can see you there, and feel free to share your slides, and over to you.
Blaise, thank you very much for that introduction and for that introductory presentation, which is a a really nice overview for what I'm going to present to you today. Just let me get my slides in front of me. Hopefully you can see them.
Yep, all good.
Excellent. Just for some reason the slides aren't moving. I'll just get to the beginning of them. Hold on. One second, let me just sort this out. For some reason my slides have stopped moving. Let me just stop this and start this again. Apologies for this.
Avi, would you like Mark to put it up from the master deck and then you can just next slide him?
Hold on, I think I've got it.
There you go. You've got it. Yep.
And is it working now?
I can see your first slide.
Do you know what? I'm going to get Mark to put it up. Sorry about this, because it's for some reason has decided to stop moving from my screen.
Worries.
Apologies.
Mark, are you able to bring up the master deck, Mark?
Yeah, hold on.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks so much, Mark. So as Blaise mentioned, we at the FIA Foundation have been doing an initiative on road safety financing. We have a report that you can find on our website that I'm going to take you through just now. It's called Life Support: Advancing the Global Agenda on Road Safety Financing. It was a report that we launched for the Road Safety Ministerial in Marrakesh earlier this year in February. And it's a report that's been put together on the basis of all of our partners really around the world, and really all of our partners entirely engage in various different ways on road safety financing, with ourselves as a major partner, and also the major sources of financing that I know many of you will come into contact with in the work that you do, and the governments that they work with. And the objective of the report really was to identify how financing could be improved globally on road safety. It's an issue that I know many of you will come across the entire time in the work that you do, the gaps that are there on financing, the lack of financing in general, the way that financing doesn't work in many cases, but should work to support road safety initiatives that you'll be carrying out around the world. Sometimes that financing can be effective, but it's a question of how do we replicate and how do we scale up effective and successful financing? How do we sort of address the system failures that are there that I'll talk about in my presentation and that are outlined in the report as well? What can we do in particular over the next 5 years through to 2030 really to improve the situation for financing? How can we use data more effectively, as Blaise also outlined in the introductory presentation just now? So I'll go on to the next slide. Thanks, Mark. So what we see here is the agenda as a whole that we presented in our life support report. We need basically to increase the levels of financing as a whole. Now, what's realistic is that there can be and there needs to be essentially a doubling of financing from the multilateral development banks, including the Asian Development Bank and banks like the EBRD for the Asia region, for your region that we're talking about today. There needs to be an essential doubling of that financing. More or less what we're saying is there needs to be a significant increase, and a doubling of financing is a realistic objective to have over the next 5 years. And essentially also we're talking about a minimum really doubling of that if we are to achieve the kind of objectives that we have on safe and sustainable mobility. But importantly, it's also about improving the effectiveness of that finance and the way that finance works. And it's not necessarily just about new financing, but as I'll outline in the presentation and that's there in the life support report, it's really about making sure that financing works better, more holistically. So where we see different sources of financing, whether it be for road safety or whether it be for climate, whether it be for equity related financing broader than just road safety or transportation, that financing all works much more effectively. Raising government demand, and this has been a major gap that we've identified, and I know many of you will be aware of, and actually the development banks themselves are aware of this, is that governments don't often know what it is that they need to ask for. You don't know the solutions until you've had the capacity in place often to deliver those solutions. So you're in a bit of a chicken and egg situation, and often as well, we as a community, as a funder ourselves, and civil society, NGOs and experts even don't know where the demand is and where governments can respond, and that it's not made visible and it's not made obvious where that demand is, and takes a long time to get mobilized. So raising demand and addressing capacity is essential. Scaling up the effective solutions, and here we see that it does happen, but happens very isolated. There'll be very effective organizations. Many of you be aware in the region here, we're talking about solutions like the IRAP road assessment, the work that the Eastern Alliance for Safe Sustainable Mobility Transportation has been working on. Partners like the IRF have been doing in the region as well. And often these solutions are there, but they need to be scaled up and replicated. The work that we ourselves also have been involved in with many other partners like the Asia Injury Prevention Foundation on helmets and on motorcycle safety, as well as school area road safety. All of that is there. It's not that we don't have these solutions, it's that they are not being scaled up. And then integrating funding streams, which is really essential and often doesn't get done. I won't name any organizations here, but in the context of putting our report together, we saw, for example, that there was a financing organization that had been financing road safety in the region and had been financing climate in the region, and had put together a strategy for roads that would be responsive to climate change and resilient, and many of the elements of that strategy directly related to road safety, but the work that same organisation had done on road safety did not connect to the work that it had done on climate in the context of that strategy. And if the two had come together, the funding streams, both for road safety and climate, could be deployed far more effectively together for the kinds of outcomes that we need to see. So too often there's a disconnect going on. Next slide, please.
Avi, 3 minutes.
Okay, I'll speed it up. So what we see here is an ideal scheme for how financing would work. That there would be a government road safety strategy. Many of the governments in the region have a road safety strategy. Often they can be improved, but the strategy would be in place. And that as partners, and as Blaise kind of outlined in the introduction, we'd be able to do that mapping, work together and help raise demand for financing support for the kinds of outcomes that we want to see. That there'll then be financing made available. The capacity and expertise would start to be strengthened and developed, then see further investment coming in, integrating with sources of climate financing and other areas that can lead to the outcomes that we need to see, resulting in effective delivery of targets and outcomes effectively. It does happen, it has happened in places like Bangladesh with the financing that they've had recently on road safety. It's happened in places that we've worked with partners like IRAP. There's been some work, as I've said, between in Central Asia, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan on developing capacity and raising demand. But that needs to be made, far more the norm across the board, that kind of approach. Next slide. And what we see here is that, we'd have these kinds of outcomes, that there would be a design for safety, a targeting of high-risk roads, addressing in national plans motorcycle two-wheeler safety in particular, which is a huge issue, and coordinating climate and transportation financing with an active mobility in particular with road safety. Next slide. This is an initiative that's going on in another region, but it's quite relevant for what we're talking about here, where we've identified a pipeline of 7 projects across sub-Saharan Africa, several $100 million, working with our partners on increasing the capacity, technical assistance to be able to deliver road safety, very intensive working with the development banks as well. One initiative here that I'd identify in particular is the third down, which is the World Bank Road to Inclusion and Socioeconomic Opportunities Rise. Now, what happened here is that you see they'd done a people-centered design approach, protecting vulnerable road users on that financing initiative. It actually resulted in an increase in financing. There was a 47% increase in the financing made available. We're talking around about $508,000 per kilometre of road for the construction that includes all the protection for vulnerable road users. It was very intensive and involved a lot of prior capacity building, engagement with stakeholders, engaging with the finance ministry officials and the road agency officials. Bringing together all those partners really made a huge difference to this programme. We didn't shy away from the fact there was an increase in financing that was needed for it, but the stakeholders could see that the objectives would be able to be delivered far more effectively if that was the case. We're not saying it's easy, and we're not saying it's something that can be done overnight. It's very intensive work, but it does have the kinds of results that we need to see. Next slide.
Avi, about 30 seconds.
Okay. Just then very quickly on the final 30 seconds, apologies, there was a lot to get across in these slides, but this is where we've seen a really effective connection between the road safety, safe and sustainable mobility work and the bigger funding that's coming in, financing that's coming in on areas like public transportation and climate. And through the data and with our partners, partner here being ITDP, that some of you will be aware of, shown the cost benefit analysis of all of this, and the fact that the rates of return are very, very high when you integrate all of these strands together. It's this kind of data that's really important. to get together. And these are projects that have actually taken place and resulted in the kinds of impacts that we need. The Tianjin case here had the IRAP methodology applied to it, and you could see the improvement in safety. And the important thing to say is it's been shown to be absolutely critical to get road safety into these bigger financing projects. Without the road safety, the other kinds of outcomes that the overall financing wants to achieve doesn't happen. So things like ridership on these big public transportation projects can't obviously happen without road safety. People can't get to the public transport hubs without safe facilities to get there in the first place. So that's been a very effective approach as well. And just to say, finally, just to wrap the whole thing up, one of the big points that really we wanted to get across today is that we're trying to set up these initiatives where stakeholders can be brought together around financing, whether it be civil society, NGOs, expert organisations, implementation partners, the government agencies, roads agencies, and finance ministries themselves, and the sources of financing for these safe and sustainable mobility initiatives. A lot of the work really needs the stakeholders being brought together in the first place and working out plans for how we can build up the capacity to be able to both stimulate demand and deliver these kinds of very important objectives. We're here to do all of that. We're very interested in further strengthening the work in this region, working in regions around the world similarly on all of this, so that we get better outcomes and strengthen financing to be able to deliver them. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Abby. And just confirming that report is available through your website, and perhaps also we might be able to share it out, a link to it through our communication to our participants as well.
Yeah, there should be a QR code and a link that you could be able to share with participants today. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Abby, for that and for that presentation. All right, so now I'm going to introduce the next of our speakers, but while I do so, Mark, could you bring up the results from the first poll question, please, just so that we can see that there. So as a reminder, the question was, how available is data on the economic impact of road crashes in your country? And thanks so much to all of you who have responded. So we can see there that it's really quite sparse in terms of what is available. Somewhat or barely available is the predominant here, and I think that is no surprise. Avi's just talked about some of the different ways in which that economic data can be used to convince or adjust for different purposes and stakeholders as well. So as I mentioned earlier in this session, this may well indeed be a gap that could be addressed for your own organisation or by partnering with universities or research institutions to start to contribute alongside your road trauma data or other data with this economic impact data. So thanks so much for all of you who responded to that poll. Okay, so with that now, as I mentioned at the start, this session's all about different ways and sources that we can use to engage stakeholders to both support financing and better implementation and outcomes for road safety. And so with that in mind, I'm very delighted now to introduce our second speaker, who's Jenny Xia from the Global Road Safety Partnership, a senior officer in their advocacy and grants program. And Jenny's going to talk to us a little bit about a case study, and particularly in terms of how data and evidence has been used in stakeholder engagement to drive forward road safety changes in this case study. So Jenny, very happy to have you here with us, and please, I'll pass over to you.
Thanks, Blaise, and for inviting me to the last session of the webinar. It's a great pleasure to be a part of this session. So good afternoon and good morning, good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Like Blaise mentioned, that my name is Jenny Donghua Xia, and I'm with the GRSP based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And I'm supporting and managing GRSP advocacy grants in China, Vietnam, and Malaysia. And today, I would like to share one case study from Malaysia and talking about a local NGO called Bike Commute Malaysia, using data and evidence to engage with stakeholders and to influence government policies and strategies. So just give me a second to show my slide. Blaise, can you see my slide?
All good, Jenny.
Okay, great. So I think I can turn on my video in order to get better connection. So the advocacy is about to advocate for a national speed limit of 30 km per hour in school areas in Malaysia. Just a little bit background about Malaysia. According to the statistics from the government, on average, there's 6,540 people die each year due to road crashes, and which indicates that 18 people die on Malaysia roads on daily basis. Unfortunately, the road crash related injuries and death are also happen in school areas. According to the government statistic, the average of fatal road crashes in school areas is about 67 fatalities per year, and the road injury in school areas is about 250 per year, which is very sad. And one of the key factors contribute to those death and injury is speeding. And as we know that a lot of studies showing that reducing speed on streets, particularly to 30 km per hour, significantly reduce the frequency and severity of crashes for all road users. Because at 30 km per hour, drivers have more time to react to unexpected events and avoid collisions. If a pedestrian hit by a car and traveling at 30 km per hour, the person has 90% of chance of surviving, while if the car was traveling at 60 km per hour, the chance of surviving reduced significantly to 10% only. So I think with those evidence, and we can say that the road death and injury in school areas can be addressed by having a strong policy requesting a maximum speed limit of 30 km per hour in school areas. In this regard, GRSP, together with the Vital Strategy and GDCI and BGAR's embedded team, have been supporting MIROS, a government agency in Malaysia, and also a local NGO called Bike Commute Malaysia, to advocate for a national speed limit of 30 km per hour in school areas since 2023. Bike Commute Malaysia is actually a small and quite young NGO. It was just established a few years ago, but they have done a lot to advocate for the policy change at local and national levels with their passion and expertise. So they started with engaging with key stakeholders, including local council in Penang, in Petaling Jaya. You can see the pictures on the left side are the consultation meetings and workshops they had with local council in Petaling Jaya, and the picture in the middle are showing their engagement with the local council in Penang, a city in Malaysia. They also engaged with the Ministry of Transport and Ministry of Works and also Ministry of Youth. The most important thing they did when engaging or interacting with stakeholders was to provide data and evidence to show that speeding is the #1 cause of road crashes worldwide, especially in cities where pedestrians are highly exposed, particularly the place like school and the hospital areas. And there are a lot of scientific evidence demonstrated that more than 40% lives saved with the introduction of 30 km per hour speed limits in the cities, again, especially in the school areas and hospital areas, etc. And because this is the project to make the school areas safer, so for the engagement, they also do a lot of things with the schools. And in Petaling Jaya and the city of Penang, including engagement and workshops and trainings with the school teachers and students to gain support from the school community for safer school street, and to gain alliance to advocate and demand for a national policy change to mandatory the 30 km/h speed limit in school areas. And another very important thing they did was to support a pilot safer school project, which shows 23% reduction in speed. This project was to change the street design and infrastructure near a school called Gadong. So the Gadong school is located near a high-speed road where cars and trucks travel at high speeds. The total intervention was 1 kilometer, including 500 meters speed bump on the left side of the school and another 500 meters speed bump on the right side. And the school also narrowed the lane from 4.2 meters to 3.3 meters, and also built a 5 cm raised pedestrian crosswalk right in front of the school, so that the students and the teachers can easily and safely cross the street. And a data survey was conducted recently on this pilot project, and it revealed that the medium speeds have been reduced by 23%. And I think this reduction leads to the reduced death and injury around school areas. So with this locally generated data and evidence, the government, especially the Ministry of Works, has decided to expand this project to other schools with providing funding and budget for this kind of safer school project. And for this pilot project, Bike Commute contributed to the street design, and the infrastructure was done by the Ministry of Works. In terms of the policy change, a lot of progress has been made. And on July 15th, 2024, the Deputy Prime Minister made a policy announcement requesting to reduce the maximum speed limit in school areas from 40 km to 30 km/h. And more excitingly, that last week, so when I was preparing for my presentation today, I got very exciting news from our grantee Bike Commute that they got invited to attend a meeting on April 29th with Road Safety Council of Malaysia, which was chaired by the Minister of Transport, Antony Lu Zhaofu. And after the meeting, at a press conference, the Minister of Transport announced that a 30 km/h speed limit will be gathered at the school zone nationwide and will be enforced soon. So in the picture you can see now, the young gentleman standing on the left is Justin Lee, the founder and director of Bike Commute Malaysia, and the person standing in the middle is the Minister of Transport, Antony Lu Zhaofu, and the person on the right is the Deputy Minister of Transport. So this is very exciting news to share with all of you, and I think it is no doubt that we will continue following up with this new policy change, and hopefully we can get a better understanding of when the policy will be gathered and will be enforced in the future. So that's all from me. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks so much, Jenny, and a great example of how, again, different data and different evidence has been used to talk to different stakeholders to convince them, this time in terms of looking at policy change and also direct implementation, as we could see there from the example you provided, and looks like there'll be so much more to go on after that. So that's a great example, and thanks so much for bringing it to us. Okay, so now let's move now to the next of our presenters, who is Ritu Mishra from the Transport Sector Group at the Asian Development Bank. And Ritu is again going to provide a different perspective in terms of how data can be used to influence either implementation and funding and financing, this time coming from the Asian Development Bank. And you can see there specifically focusing on safer road infrastructure, which of course is a major focus of the Asian Development Bank. So Ritu, lovely to have you with us, and please, I'll pass over to you now.
Thanks, Blaise. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Ritu Mishra, Transport Specialist at ADB. And today I will talk about harnessing road safety data for safer infrastructure, drawing on the ADB's approach and best practices. As we all know, road safety remains a critical challenge in Asia and the Pacific, where approximately 60% of global road fatalities occur. So today I'll be sharing how road safety assessments are integrated into ADB's project cycle and how we can use data to implement effective interventions to create safer and more resilient road network. Mark, next slide, please. So let's take a closer look at how road safety assessments are integrated throughout this project cycle. So the first phase, where is preparation and approval. So this is where we scope and assess road safety risks and opportunities. It's critical to start early so that safety is built into the project's DNA. So following initial risk scoping, there might be a need to conduct in-depth safety assessments to create crucial baseline data. And the data informs not only the selection of appropriate project interventions, but also project documentation, and serves as a benchmark for evaluating the project's impact on road safety. The second phase, which is implementation. Here we move into developing and implementing the actual safety interventions, such as safer designs, improved signage, speed management, and we also monitor their effectiveness. And the last stage, which is the completion and evaluation of the project. This is the final stage where we evaluate the outcomes, where our safety goals achieved, what lessons can we draw to improve future projects. This phase also emphasizes more on transparency, learning, and accountability. So by embedding this road safety throughout the project lifecycle, we ensure that it's not an afterthought, but it becomes a more core component of infrastructure development. Next slide, please, Mark. So this slide presents the various tools and activities used for road safety assessments, which can be done throughout a project's life. So let me break it down. So first, the data analysis and modeling. So we used road crash data, speed profiles, traffic volumes, and road design characteristics to identify black spots and high-risk corridors. These analysis helps pinpoint crash black spots, underlying risk factors, and vulnerable road user groups. And data can come from various sources like national database, WHO estimates, or even model projections with where direct data is limited. The second one is looking into more on maturity of road safety systems. So we assess institutional capacity, legal frameworks, and coordination among agencies to understand the environment in which the project operates. Then we carry out the inspections and the impact assessments. These are carried out at multiple stages to identify design or operational hazards and ensure mitigation is built into the design. We also conduct several audits and assessments, which can be either road safety audits or IRAP assessments, or combining both road safety audits and IRAP assessments at different stages, from feasibility study, preliminary and detailed design, and even road walks and pre-opening road safety audits. These provide a structured method to review safety implications of design. And we also look how traffic management is being done during construction. So this phase is often overlooked, but is one of the most hazardous situation with there's a lot of crashes happening during the construction. So we assess temporary traffic control plans to ensure safe navigation for the users. And last not but the least, we have been discussing this on stakeholder engagement. So we look into engaging communities, road users, and local agencies to ensure that interventions are practical, culturally appropriate, as well as well understood. So if you see on the right side of the slide, you can see how different assessments have been integrated into the project timeline. And even road safety audits can be merged together with the star ratings, which we call star rating for road safety audits. So basically, which can be conducted at several stages. And this is a quite unique approach which integrates both the positive sides of road safety audit as well as IRAP star assessments. So you can find a more detailed guidance on this in our CAREC manual, which is called Star Rating for Road Safety Audit, which is available in both English and Russian. Next slide, please. So if we look at the safety interventions, so now let's look at what we do with all the data and assessments. So in our projects we target safety interventions, and these safety interventions are designed and implemented. These may include like infrastructure improvements such as safer, as I said, safer road designs, more on engineering side, as well as it can also range from not only from engineering solutions but to different policy level changes such as speed enforcement to helmet laws and others. So we also focus and prioritize in institutional strengthening, like training for traffic police, capacity building for local planners, engineers, designers, and improving emergency response system as well. So importantly, we tie all interventions to the project document, as we specifically we call it design and monitoring framework, through which we when the project is completed, we measure whether our DMF has been fulfilled or not. I mean, either we have met our DMF targets or not. We also factor all these road safety benefits in our economic analysis, gender assessments, poverty and social assessments, transport sector assessment, as well as climate change related documents. We set very specific safety performance indicators and monitor progress during the implementation. And if any incidents or compliance issues are detected, we respond with mid-course corrections to ensure our safety goals remain on track. So next slide, please. So as we discussed, road safety is not just about reacting to the crash data, it's being more proactive. As part of our monitoring, we track performance relative to targets, document any safety incidents and the root causes, capture lessons learned to guide our future projects as well. So this ensures that road safety is not just project specific, but contributes to systemic learning across ADB's transport portfolio. So by embedding these lessons into our future planning, we enhance our approach over time, creating a more complete cycle of safer infrastructure delivery. So, so to conclude my presentation, I would say road safety must be considered from the very beginning of the project preparation, and it must remain focused throughout the implementation and beyond as well. So by systematically harnessing this road safety data through audits, inspections, risk ratings, and continuous stakeholder engagement, we can deliver infrastructure that only connects. We can deliver infrastructure that not only connects people, but also protects them. So I'll just stop here, and thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ritu. What a great insight into the way in which, again, data is used to inform really, really specific processes that actually have a huge outcome in terms of what our transport systems throughout Asia look like. And I think of particular interest there, I picked up two things. One was how within ADB, you are producing and analyzing data to talk to different stakeholders to actually integrate safety, right? So even within ADB, we see some of those fundamental principles be important in your work. But I would also encourage for those on this webinar who are not within ADB to look and see what is the type of data that people such as Ritu and others in the bank are using to make that case. And that's where collaboration, I think, is a real potential. Is, you know, when is it going to be that people such as Ritu have more and more of that data that they can use to convince governments to integrate the type of approaches that Ritu is mentioning there. So I think a real opportunity and the type of data there that can be useful to make that case. So thanks, Ritu, for that so much. Okay, so in a moment, I'm going to invite the final of our speakers, but we're also now going to give a little moment to provide some further interaction from you all. So Mark, can we bring up the next of the questions? Yes, so we're not actually going to use a poll for this one, but instead we're going to encourage you to use the Q&A box to put in your responses. So the question is, what communication and engagement tactics have you found to work to influence better financing or funding or even implementation? So what communication and engagement tactics have you found to work to influence people to get those better outcomes, whether it be financing or funding or even implementation? So please, if while you're listening to the next presentations, you can put an answer into the Q&A box, that would be great. And perhaps, Mark, I could also ask if the question is posted on the Q&A so people can see it there as well, and they are able to remember what the question is. So yes, I encourage any of you to use the Q&A to put your answers in. We'd love to hear what has worked for you when it comes to good stakeholder engagement tactics. Okay, so while you're doing that in the Q&A box, I'm going to introduce the final of our speakers, who is Dennis Mazingi, who is a research associate with the George Institute for Global Health. As mentioned at the start of this session, we really wanted to have quite a diverse range of speakers who are looking at different data, different approaches, different ways to convince stakeholders to really prioritize this issue of road safety. And Dennis, it's great that he's joining us today to talk about another of the resources that you might be able to use on a key topic that is important to everyone, which is children. So Dennis, great to have you here with us today. And please, I'll pass over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Blaise. I hope you can hear me. I'm going to talk to you about the Global Status Report on Child and Adolescent Road Safety, which is an offshoot of the main Global Status Report, but with a specific focus on children and adolescents. That was prepared for the Morocco Interministerial meeting just earlier this year. So I'm basically going to talk through introducing the report, what's in it, how to use the data for impact, and one or two examples about how this has been done. So as we all know, road traffic injuries have a substantial burden around the world, but in particular, they're a leading cause of death. So in many countries and certainly around the world, they're the leading cause of death for children and adolescents aged 5 to 19 years, with over 182,000 young lives lost annually. And behind these statistics are real children and their families that have unrealized potential, not only personal potential, but also economic and productive potential in their countries. This is looking at Eastern Asia Pacific region, the UNICEF region. Again, just to note that there's a substantial burden of disease. This is data coming from the 2019 Global Burden of Disease, but the numbers have gone slightly up since this report. So as I said, our Global Status Report on Child and Adolescent Road Safety is an offshoot of the Global Status Report. And there are various reports that have been published over the years. But really what we noted was that children and adolescents are, well, a personal interest of ours, but also are frequently left out of the conversation. A lot of the data that's in the Global Status Report, it's quite a large number of pages, and so it's very useful as a reference report, but it doesn't really surface vulnerable road users, for example, children. And actually, there's some data that's completely missing and that we just don't have as it relates to policies around road safety for children. So just at a glance, you can see that the data that we've surfaced for children in particular, 500 children and adolescents die every day, which is about one death every 3 minutes. around this is children and adolescents in the context of 2 billion plus motor vehicles, or a doubling of the number of cars worldwide. Unfortunately, there's a large disparity, with most of these fatalities happening in low and middle income countries, and also in the context, again, of an increasing world population, particularly in low and middle income countries, especially on the continent of Africa, but also others as well, living in urban areas. It's just interesting to note that when you disaggregate road crashes and the various statistics by age groupings, what you do is you surface risk, because age groupings then have implications for risk profiles and mobility, and then have implications for action. So it's really important that we're able to take this big group of children who tend to be put together when big global reports and figures are put together, and then disaggregate them into the various age categories and therefore risk groupings. And you can see here that, as we all know, depending on what age you are, what age grouping you are, you have a different risk category and therefore different targets for intervention. And so that's one of the gaps that this report addresses, is that children and adolescents tend to be put together with adults and therefore are unseen and unheard within the substantial burden. The interventions are specific to their risk profile and mobility patterns. And as I've said, risk is intimately linked to age group and developmental age. And then there are also some gaps in data for the status for child and adolescent policies that were not in the report, and that actually the data is very difficult to find, if not impossible. So in the report, essentially, we've split it into a variety of different sections. The first is the rationale for the focus on children and adolescents, because even though to us it's quite intuitive that a focus on children is a kind of best buy, it's very forward-looking, future-proofing, and taking care of what will be the most productive age group, and certainly in some countries the biggest age grouping demographically. That's not necessarily intuitive for policymakers. Policymakers tend to think of road crashes as a problem that happens in adults, or they tend to be blind to the kind of specific risk factors that happen to children and adolescents. And so that first part is really about making the case from a health perspective, but also from an economic perspective, and then also bringing in other co-benefits that include things like climate and the environment, and the urban environment, for example, and other things that come into it. The second is putting together the global burden of road crashes in children and adolescents. Unfortunately, even though we have, a better and better statistics on road crashes globally, what tends to happen is that children are not, well, the childhood age group is not really brought out, or they're lumped together, or the definition of a child in the child age groups tends to be different depending on which data source you're looking at. So various publications have used 13, 18, 19, 25, or 29 to refer to children and adolescents. And as I've shown you before, those kind of broad age groupings are not really helpful when thinking about risk. And then we looked at policy options for the prevention of road crashes in children. So moving directly on from these risk categories, there are policy options that apply specifically for children and adolescents. And then we looked at the current global status and gaps in policy measures. Important to understand that even though the global status report is quite, very authoritative and comprehensive, there are some notable gaps as they relate to children. So, for example, 30 kilometers per hour zones around the world and other policies have not been mapped in this report specifically. So how can people use this report? Well, the first thing is, as I've said before, use it to convince policymakers of the place of road safety in child health and of the place of children in road safety, and using that first chapter, the rationale for the focus, including the economic benefits and the other co-benefits that include the climate and the urban environment. Benchmarking a country's performance. So it's really important for countries to be able to benchmark themselves against other countries in the region, especially those that have similar socioeconomic circumstances. And that actually in itself acts as an impetus for action. Identifying policy gaps. So then once you've you've convinced your policymakers that this is an important issue, and that they can then see where are the gaps, which leads to the what can we do about them. So what are the policy gaps? And that's something that we've really surfaced quite, we've highlighted quite significantly in our report. And then prioritizing interventions. What can we do about it? And that is another thing that you can use this data for. And then, of course, monitoring progress. So using those, the data that we've put there as baseline for interventions. So some of the data and similar data has been used in various different countries. So, for example, to create impactful advocacy tools, like Indonesia produced a policy brief that used this type of data to really trying to convince the government about the importance of children and adolescents among the whole road safety kind of issue, but also to give them specifics about what are the policy gaps and what can actually be done. So here you can see some of the policy gaps as they relate specifically to children and adolescents in the middle that appears in this policy brief. And then these country overviews that essentially give an overview of where the country stands in terms of child and adolescent road safety. So these kind of impactful advocacy tools can be derived directly from the report that we've put together. And as I said again, this allows for you to see directly some of the things that lead to action. So, for example, understanding that motorcycles are a major cause of road crashes in children and adolescents in certain countries has led to action because of this kind of very visceral, very clear visualization that's been shown to government. So yeah, in conclusion, this report is really designed as a pragmatic tool for advocacy and action. It's not just about describing the problem, but also empowering the people using the report to push for solutions at their various different levels, from municipal to national government and beyond. The data is broken down, which is really important, by age, gender, road user type, country and region. And then also looking at different sectors and co-benefits is a really important part of convincing governments and also helping them to do something about it. And then there are clear gaps and clear solutions shown and highlighted that all align with evidence. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dennis. What a great resource and a great overview of how it can be used. I want to, as I pass back to Jess, pick up one thing you mentioned, which is something we mentioned earlier. You said, how can this report be used to bring road safety to the child health agenda and to bring children back to the road safety agenda? And that's exactly what we were discussing earlier, which is how are you taking data sources and talking about this topic to different people in ways that convince them. And just one small anecdote as I pass over just about that specific issue. I was in the African region last year in Rwanda, and we were having a road safety workshop. And just so happened that we found that during the coffee break, we met some people, and we found that in the next conference room, they were having an African region conference on child health with hundreds of delegates. We were in a separate room doing road safety, and there was not one element of their audience that was in ours, and road safety was not mentioned once in the African region child health conference. So there it is. How can we use reports such as this to influence those, reports such as that Avi mentioned to influence financing, better implementation, and hopefully this has given a good overview of some of those different approaches and tools that can be used. So Dennis, thanks for that, and Jess, I'll pass back to you.
Thank you very much to Blaise and all our speakers for their very interesting presentation. Can I please invite all the speakers to come back and to join us for this panel discussion? And thank you to all the attendees that have contributed their thoughts and feedback to question number 2 on what we should be looking at and what you have found to be most impactful in swaying your governments. And just quickly summarize, because there's been so much rich answers in the Q&A box, is that data seems to be an important aspect of helping to convince governments of financing and actions. So using the high numbers of road deaths and injuries experienced in your countries is often a very good reason to convince government for action and financing. Targeted stakeholder management is also being raised quite a few times. So making sure that you engage the stakeholders from the start of the project, throughout the project, and making sure that you're using the right mediums to engage with stakeholders is also a very important aspect mentioned by many. So using media, social media, and also making sure that you actually speak the language of the local government is also very helpful. Using demonstration projects to show how different things can work was also another very effective way that a lot of attendees have sort of mentioned in the Q&A as well. So that is a very quick summary. If you want to read in more detail, please do go to the Q&A box and have a read in more detail some of the answers that have been provided. So now, if I invite all our speakers to come back, there's been a lot of questions posed in the Q&A box for each of our speakers as well. So I'll just ask each of our speakers a quick question, and if you can keep your answer short and sharp, that would be very much appreciated so we can get through as many as possible. So Blaise, I might throw it to you first. Thank you for your presentation on the importance of actually having data. And you also mentioned that the data is one of the significant gaps between, funding and accessing that. So one of the questions that we got in the Q&A was, can AI help contribute to reducing this gap of data collection and data availability? Have you got any thoughts on that?
Gosh, that's probably a whole session in itself, Jess. Okay, short and sharp, sure. So I guess the simple answer is yes, of course. If we have more ways to generate data that can diversify the messages and the ways in which we're talking to different stakeholders, I think that's fantastic. However, my response to any of these type of innovations when it comes to stakeholder engagement is, without the proper planning and process about who you're talking to, how you're talking to them, what is going to convince them, you can have all of the data and resources, whether it's AI generated, research generated or not, it is still much less likely that you're going to have that impact in convincing and persuading. So my suggestion would be, before jumping into using a myriad of different tools to generate data, take that time to say, right, if we're looking at financing, who do we need to talk to? Where do we need to talk to them? What might convince them? And map those out and take a considered approach as to what might be persuasive. And it is that point you can start to say, right, well, what do we have that is existing? You may already have the data available, right? But if not, then what tools are at your disposal? And that is where I would start to factor in, such as AI and other aspects there. But the fundamental for me is, have that considered and flexible approach in your stakeholder engagement, but have a plan. And you'll see, I think, significantly better results in terms of being able to influence.
Great. Thanks for that answer, Blaise. And can I please invite Ritu, Jenny, and Dennis to turn on their cameras and come back and join us on this panel? Avi, we've got some questions for you in the chat, and a two-part question. So the World Bank and related road safety projects that you mentioned, was there a post-evaluation of how well these projects worked? And were the projects you also mentioned, were they also co-financed by governments and the private sector?
Yeah, these are good questions. I mean, there's post-evaluation that's typically done on development bank projects, that happens generally speaking. I think the important thing is that often the data as a whole really does need to be strengthened. It needs to be strengthened throughout the process, not just in terms of post-evaluation, but all the way through. And governments and partners often struggle for data. It's a perennial issue that we face with our partners a lot of the time. What we do is that we carry out the kind of catalytic work with partners and with governments and with the finance institutions, and we're putting in place the kind of the tracking, the project monitoring and evaluation throughout that kind of work. And in the work that we've been doing and the work that we're going to continue building on, we'll be doing that with our partners and kind of on an incubator approach, looking to where we can expand and build on all of that. So there's all of that done. What was the other question? Apologies.
In the interest of time, Avi, if you don't mind typing your answer to the second question into the Q&A box, is the second part of that question, where the project's actually co-financed by governments and the private sector. If you can type
well, the answer is often yes, but often again that's an area that needs strengthening, is kind of bringing the sources of finance together, which is something that we're working on as well.
Thank you so much for that, Avi. Jenny, I just want to come to you next and say a big congratulations to you and your grantee for that excellent result in Malaysia. Obviously, there would have been some evidence to sit behind that, and I think one of the questions was, is there data to show the reduction in trauma after providing school treatments? Would you be able to maybe point out a couple of sources that you might have used?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Actually, I saw the same question in the question and answer. The short answer is that we don't have data yet, because this is a relatively new project, just completed, and we just did a survey which shows 23% reduction in speed. But in terms of the reduction in fatality and injury, it might take some time for us to observe and to identify the specific number for that.
Yes, but there would be evidence from other countries and projects that have implemented something similar that would have shown a reduction that you used as evidence for your project?
Sorry, I'm not sure if I can answer this question now.
Oh, no, that's okay. But yeah, so there would be a number of sources, I guess, to show the effectiveness of a 30k speed limit around the school zones to use to help convince the Malaysian government that this is a good initiative.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think there's one source. There's one source from a Australian study and showing that the 40% of life saved due to introduction of the 30k per hour speed limit to a city or to a particular areas where pedestrians are highly exposed. I can share maybe I can try to find the link and share with everyone.
Thank you very much, Jenny. I know we're quickly running out of time, but just two very short questions for Ritu and Dennis. Ritu, have you got any case studies to showcase how to do the gender assessment in the infrastructure projects?
Well, that's a very good question. Basically, first, what we need to do is do a quick data and analysis. So we need to collect and analyze more gender disaggregated data to understand the different mobility patterns, safety concerns, and risk faced by men, women, and vulnerable groups. And the second we need to focus is on gender inclusive design, like what features need to be incorporated in the road design or in the transport infrastructure design itself to make it more inclusive, not only for gender, but all road vulnerable users as well. And then we need to look into the third step, which is more on policy and planning integration. So we need to apply gender impact assessments in road safety policies and ensure representation of women in transport planning processes as well. And then the last step we need to look into is monitor and feedback. So we need to set a clear target on what activities we are going to achieve, and then we need to track the progress using gender specific safety indicators and engage communities to ensure ongoing responsiveness.
Great. Thank you for that great answer, Ritu. And I know we're just on time now, but if you can just indulge us for a couple more minutes, we would really appreciate that. And lastly, Dennis, great presentation on youth and road safety. So do you think there is a role for youth and young people in advocating for policy changes?
Absolutely. Youth are some of the most engaged and capable communicators, using kind of newer technology and newer forms of getting the message out there, social media, etc. But also because they are, the affected demographic, they really bring a passion and and they're really effective at getting that message out. And they're quite some effective young road safety advocates around the world that have been doing exactly that. And I think it's really important that they get involved and that we involve them, because it's really about looking at the roads from their perspective. So from their height, from their cognitive perspective, and then getting the message out that way rather than an adult trying to speak for children.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you there, Dennis. Always a role for youth in advocating for better road safety changes. And with that, I'd like to say a very big thank you to all our speakers for taking the time to come and share their knowledge and expertise with us all. So thank you for that. And just as a very last wrap up then, Mark, can you please bring up the last poll? As always, we would appreciate your feedback on what you found most helpful in today's webinar. As this is the last session of the webinar series 1, you will be receiving an evaluation form in the next couple of days, and would really appreciate if you can share any feedback you have on how we can improve for the next webinar edition. And if we move to the next slide, please, Mark. And as always, all the materials from this session and the previous sessions are available on the APRSO website, and the web link is just about to show up on your screen now. So please go to the Knowledge Hub and you will be able to download all the materials from that website. And then if we move to the next slide. So next week, we will be starting the second edition of our webinar series on capacity building to coincide with the UN Road Safety Week that is happening next week. Our very first session will be focusing on safer walking and safer cycling in cities. So once again, we've got a great lineup of speakers, and we would really welcome you all to come and join us for our next session in our second edition of the webinar series. So with that, I'd like to say a very big thank you to all of you for joining us in this session and in all the previous sessions. It's been lovely having you all attend, and I hope you found this webinar series interesting and helpful for the work that you do. And with that, I wish you all a very great day, and I hope to see you on the next webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.